I'm recording on a laptop, not in my normal environment, so I don't know, guys. It is what it is. Anyway, we got tech news today, and let's start with the fact that it is Prime Day. I had already done a video covering some early Prime Day deals. Maybe you've already checked that out. But I did make a community post this morning. Not sure if I'd get a video out today, but hey, let's go ahead and try it. I am seeing that there is a QD OLED 27-inch 1440p 240 hertz display for a penny. I was going to say under $500, but okay, it's a penny under. However, that is a better price than usual. OLED monitors are coming down, which is good to see. And I still understand this is completely out of a lot of people's price range. But if you're instead looking for a 4K panel, 120 hertz, you're okay with IPS rather than going the OLED route, at $240, this one might interest you from Dell. And then I also noticed a decent power supply deal here. 650 watts is more than enough for most builds. I checked this one on the PSU tier list. It gets a B tier, which is quite solid from MSI. $60 for 650 watts on an 80 plus gold B tier unit seems pretty good to me. Now, I did also notice, okay, not exactly a PC hardware deal, although maybe you use some headphones at times. I actually use AirPods 2 myself. I used AirPods Pro 2, I should specify, because the Pro line is different. I do very much like these. I generally am not a huge Apple product fan, but the AirPods specifically I do quite like. And these are my daily driver on the go headphones on like a desk setup. I've got some huge like over-ear things that plug in with the wire, so no latency and all that. But do like these. And if you don't like the silicon tips to go in your ear, my wife's like that. Just not comfortable for her for whatever reason. There is also the AirPods 4, which sit on the ear more rather than like silicon tip in the ear. You probably know what I'm talking about. Anyway, also these on a lower price than usual. Again, you could spot the early Prime Day deals where we saw a bunch of good like CPU deals, especially some other monitor deals and all that, and a lot of those are still active. Now, I was trying to check if there was going to be any amazing GPU deals today, and unfortunately, I'm just not seeing it right now. However, interestingly, this is kind of more of a news thing rather than me saying you should run out and buy this. It really does seem like people are actually rejecting the 8GB graphics cards. I'm not sure if that's going to be overall in like the pre-built market where, some teenager's mom goes to Best Buy and buys them something, but maybe in the DIY market where you buy the GPU separately, there are some real signs that this time around 8GB cards are getting rejected because while most of NVIDIA's 50 series is still over MSRP and very few units are even at MSRP, the 5060 Ti 8GB is actually below MSRP now. I did check this out for myself. 8GB model at $350. Remember, MSRP, I believe, was $380. So they're already going below MSRP, and I was wondering, hey, that's got to be hitting AMD as well. And I actually checked out their 9060 XT 8GB cards are also, this one I would say is sort of below MSRP. Obviously, 270 is below MSRP, but if you check this out, it's not actually selling for 270. What it is it's selling at MSRP of $300 on Newegg with a $30 gift card. Again, I'm not saying rush out and buy these, although if you can use that $30 gift card, I will say that while $300 feels like a lot for 8GB, the lower you get below $300, the less issue I have with it. Although honestly, I would kind of prefer if, $300 cards were like 12GB and, the 8GB cards were closer to the $200 mark. But hey, at least it seems like the market's headed in the right direction on all of that. Now, another thing I want to address in this news video today is that, how should I put this? I've been getting comments like this constantly ever since Hardware Unboxed put out their updated testing of the 9070 XT versus 5070 Ti. I think it was titled something along the lines of like fine wine, all of that. Now, the thing is, I'm getting a lot of comments where people are asking me to update my testing of the 9070 XT versus the 5070 Ti because in Hardware Unboxed video, they saw a 9% improvement versus their launch reviews for the 9070 XT, whereas the 5070 Ti only had something like, I think it was like a 2% improvement, something like that. It was less. It was noticeably less. So their 9070 XT went from a few percent slower than the 5070 Ti to a few percent faster. In general, though, they've always been similar performance, other than NVIDIA has better RT, more DLSS support and wider games, etc. So generally, if they cost a similar price, it makes sense to go with the 5070 Ti, and I don't think any of these results have really changed that. Also, I already did a pretty recent 9070 XT versus 5070 Ti video, and also there's been, I think, some misunderstanding of this video. Because I think a lot of people interpreted Hardware Unboxed results as saying that the latest driver update increased the 9070 XT performance on average by 9%. And Hardware Unboxed never made that claim in their video, but due to the nature of, titles and thumbnails and people skipping to look at a graph and not watching a full video with the full explanation, I think that that's what a lot of people took away from the video. So I think it's really important to understand because, first of all, there's been some other videos kind of cross-checking this result and not seeing a 9% gain from the latest drivers, which makes sense because that video, again, never actually tested the drivers in isolation. And Hardware Unboxed has been so much questions on this, they've actually had to post a response as well. And so what I think is really important to understand about the Hardware Unboxed results is that they weren't isolating the drivers. They also weren't testing the most recent driver update versus the previous drivers. What they were testing was their launch review data against current testing, if you do it now, on the latest drivers, but also on the latest, Windows version and latest game versions, etc. So while they did see their average performance for the 9070 XT increase by 9% at 1440p, I think it was, and less at other stuff, that was a combination of multiple driver updates and Windows updates and game updates. And not every game saw improvements at all. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is, when people are constantly asking me on multiple videos and multiple comments on each video to retest my 9070 XT versus my 5070 Ti result, I'll say that I did that very recently. It already had many game updates, Windows updates, driver updates in place. And the latest driver update compared to when I did that did not at all have some massive 9% performance gain. That's just simply not what happened. And channels that have tried to cross-check that as just testing the drivers exclusively did not see a 9% gain. And again, that gain was a combination of a lot of things, not just a driver update. And again, Hardware Unboxed were clear about that if you watched the full video, but if you just looked at, their end graph or just like looked at what other people were commenting on that, it just feels like this testing was misunderstood. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on to some other news. The 5050 it is out now, and I think one of the most disappointing things about it is that it didn't come with just like, if the power limit had been low enough, it could have been like a slot-powered design, which then would be really cool in like an ultra-compact form factor. Unfortunately, we're getting the, not unfortunately, we're getting the ultra-compact form factors, but because the power level isn't low enough to just be slot-powered, it's still not going to do what some of the, previous 50 series cards could do that were just slot-powered. So that's a little bit unfortunate. Oh, well. We're also seeing that Ada64 has added support for Zen 6 CPUs and an unannounced Radeon 9060 non-XT. So if you were wondering, is AMD going to have some kind of price competitor to the 5050? Because remember, right now, all we have is the 9060 XT 8GB for the lowest end from the 90 series. Okay, is there going to be a cut-down version of that? Well, there is, at least in Ada64, support being added for an RX 9060 non-XT. Now, what exactly that would be, how fast would it be, I don't know. We will have to wait and see. Now, I'm also seeing it reported that lossless scaling frame generation, which I know is extremely popular, has been ported to Linux. And with the growing popularity of Linux gaming, I know if you look at overall numbers, it's not massive, but there have been a lot of recent articles, testing, etc., showing how far Linux gaming has come, and in certain situations, even beating Windows at certain games, certain tasks, etc. It's kind of nice to see that. So in general, I really like competition, and if things can start moving over to Linux, get light a little fire under Microsoft, maybe sounds pretty cool to me. Speaking of, well, I guess maybe not speaking of handheld devices, although that's one of the places where we saw the Linux devices get, some benefits versus some Windows devices was in the handheld space. We have now seen the MSI Claw A8 with the Ryzen Z2 Extreme tested. Now, MSI Claws had previously been running Intel hardware. They were one of the few Intel-based handhelds. And so that's pretty cool to see. You can see in some benchmarks that it's interesting to see how they stack up. These are just some synthetic results being tested here, but we're also seeing some game performance numbers, etc. I will link all my sources in the video description if you want to take a look. I don't have the Claw myself. I'm really interested in the handheld space, though. I've still got the Steam Deck, again, because I like how well the SteamOS Linux thing works on it, but I am keeping my eyes open if anything can convince me to move forward. For me, what I'm looking for is if it's going to be an AMD-based system still, I would really like to see if at some point we'll get an APU with FSR4 support, because having higher quality upscaling on a handheld device, I think, would be quite nice to see. Now, there's been some debate recently about Games Pass and whether it's actually profitable or whether it was a huge mistake. And there was some discussion of some numbers saying that it is profitable, but it was pointed out that a lot of first-party Xbox games are going on Game Pass. That's one of the biggest drivers for it, and yet they're not taking into account the cost of developing those games as part of the measurement of whether Game Pass is profitable. Now, I could see either way making sense, because it's not like those games are only used for Game Pass. They're also sold directly or something like that. I think in a company the size of Microsoft, it would actually, to me, make sense to maybe have, the Game Pass division pay, similar to how they would a third-party developer, pay the game publisher within Microsoft like a certain amount to get it on Game Pass, and then the publishing and development sector could then maybe have its own numbers, factor that in. I don't know exactly. I think something like that could potentially make sense. However, there have been some follow-up articles saying that even if you did factor in the loss of first-party sales, that it would still likely come out profitable. But anyway, I'm not sure how important any of this is. It's just kind of there's a big question right now on what is going on with Xbox and their future and all of that. Also mention that in the PC space, we've often been seeing games getting path tracing updates. Usually take some kind of NVIDIA push. So it's like most games don't come out with the big NVIDIA path tracing stuff. So still kind of newsworthy when we see what is the next game getting that. And it's actually apparently coming to War Thunder. However, man, in multiplayer titles, I'm just not entirely convinced that's the right place for it. But hey, even if it gets the setting, that doesn't mean you can't just turn it off and not use it. Now, last thing I want to mention is in my previous news video, I had said that I found it a little bit ironic that Capcom was scheduled to give a lecture at CEDEC to talk about game optimization and use Monster Hunter Wilds as their example for talking about game optimization. And I felt that a bit ironic, given I don't think many people would consider Monster Hunter Wilds to be a shining example of game optimization. Now, it's being reported now that lecture at CEDEC is being canceled. Is that pronounced SEDEC or I don't know. Anyway, whatever. The point is the lecture, I think, is getting canceled. Now, this seems to be a bit of a clickbait title on it, seeming to make a causal relationship between threats and harassment and the canceling of the lecture. I think this is just clickbait. There have been reports that Monster Hunter developers have faced some threats and harassment over the game, including its optimization. And unfortunately, that's kind of how, there's some not very nice people in the game, game community who maybe have legitimate concerns, but overreact and take them out on people in violent threats and harassment. However, I don't think there's any evidence support stated here or anywhere else I could find that seemed to say that any threats or harassment were about this lecture specifically. So I think they're trying to connect two things that are not exactly connected. But maybe Capcom did realize that Monster Hunter Wilds was, they were generating some negative press over giving a talk about optimization on a game that few people would consider optimized. Anyway, that's the news that I have for you guys today. I have hopefully recorded well. I usually have a second monitor where I can see my recording window while I talk, and I'm on the green screen and can do all sorts of cool stuff. I'm just using a webcam, mic, and camera here, so on a little laptop. So kind of an interesting experiment. We'll see how it worked out. And when I watch this video, I hope you guys have an excellent day.